And welcome back into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. George Bremer and Ryan Hickey here with you. George, the countdown to the draft is on single digits now until we get to next Thursday, and the Colts finally get on the clock. We got a jam-packed Blue Horseshoe pod here with you, kind of sort out some rumors draft season wise. Are we going to believe what is going on right now in Houston? If you haven't heard, we'll tell you about that here in a second. We will give our official predictions of who we think the Colts will take and what pick they will be taking that player at as well. So the official Blue Horseshoe Colts first round predictions will be given later on today. But first, George, before we get to that, I think really we should look at the top of the draft right now because there's a lot of possibilities. We can spend an entire podcast running through simulations of who could get drafted where and who the Colts could be, getting at all different options of what happened to the top of the draft. If you are right now wanting the best case scenario for the Colts, I'm right now the best case scenario for the Colts and something every single Colts fan should be rooting for at pick number 1 is for the Panthers to take Bryce Young. Because if the Panthers take Bryce Young, I don't know about yourself, George. We'll get your thoughts on this in a second here. I am buying the rumors. I am buying the swirl right now, and I get it. It's rumor season, so maybe I'm getting played here. But if so, I'm bought hook, line, and sinker. I am buying the reports and the chatter that the Texans will not take CJ Stroud. That for whatever reason they don't like him, they do not take him. They will not take him at number 2. And seemingly the Texans right now seem to be at a Bryce Young or bust sort of thought when it comes to quarterbacks. I'm buying that. So right now you're looking at what's the best option for the Colts right now. Bryce Young going number 1. It's something every single fan should be rooting for because that, I think, starts the first domino of chaos and allows for the best situation possible for the Colts to get their quarterback that they want either at 4 or maybe even get a quarterback in CJ Stroud we didn't think was going to be available to them and all of a sudden now change the trajectory of what this franchise is going to be moving forward. So that all starts with Bryce Young going number 1 to the Panthers. If it's CJ Stroud, then all of a sudden the Texans take Bryce Young, and that's moot. Root every single fan. Root for Bryce Young going number 1 to the Panthers. There's been a lot of talk, George, right, of what's going on in Houston. Are they going to actually skip a quarterback? Where are you right now? Like, what is your belief level in a lot of these rumors swirling right now, the division rival?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a great year for mock drafters. I mean,
You're
there's
right about
so
that.
many crazy possibilities out there, and you can really have fun when you're trying to map out how things might play out. Second of all, I think it's kind of ironic that the Colts are sitting here waiting for Frank Reich to give them a parting gift now, and make this pick happen. Third, I think the biggest reason, honestly, regardless of how things end up for the Colts, to root for Bryce Young to go number 1 is to get him out of the AFC South. In fact, get him out of the AFC altogether. He'll be over in the other conference. Like legitimately looking at the NFC, is he a top 5 quarterback over there the day he steps in?
I mean, it's
there's
hard.
such a weak crowd over there right now.
It's
Especially
Jalen
if Aaron
Hurts.
Rodgers goes to the Jets.
And who else? Yeah, I'm with you.
I mean, he's got a real chance to really shoot up that board really quickly. But I think to me, that's number 1. No matter what happens to the Colts, you're not going to have to play Bryce Young twice a year. That's a win for them. The Houston side of things, I'm not sure where I am right now. I do buy the Stroud stuff. That I was hearing as far back as the combine that they might not be in the Stroud market for various reasons. Now, maybe it was a lie then too, and it's just one that's hung around for a few months. That definitely happens. But I don't put it into that after April 1st. I don't believe anything I hear pile because I heard it before April 1st. So, we'll see how that one plays out. I don't know. We had talked kind of off the air before we got going. If you're the Texans and you've got a defensive minded head coach who came from Alabama, mind you, that's where he played his college days. Is it the worst scenario in your mind to take Will Anderson and build around him on defense, make him the focal point on that side of the ball, basically try to make him your new JJ Watt? Yeah, I don't know that that's a terrible plan. Bringing him in and having him kind of be the face of the franchise for a year, and then you figure out what you're doing at quarterback. Maybe you take one at 12, maybe you trade back up, maybe you look in the free agent market next year, or you just put it off to the draft next year. But I don't. It's interesting. I don't know what the appetite is not being down there. I don't know what the appetite is from the fan base there for something like that. More importantly, I don't know what the appetite is from the owner for something like that. But I will say this: any franchise, Houston, the Colts, whoever it is, if you're sitting there at number 2 and you don't believe in the quarterbacks for whatever reason, you can't force it. I think that's a bigger mistake than either trading out or going with top defensive player would be.
All right, we'll circle back to that thought here in a second, George. But we do want to welcome on Aaron Wilson, who does cover the Texans and the NFL for KPRC2 out there in Houston. Boots on the ground, surrounding the Texans is very knows that team very well. And Aaron, first of all, thanks for coming on the Blue Horseshoe podcast, joining us here. But from a Colts perspective, we are looking at this draft, and we really thought for the most part it's going to be in some order: Bryce Young and CJ Stroud going 1 and 2, and really the draft started at 3, and the Colts are going to have to decide between Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. And now, really, there's been kind of some talks and whispers throughout, but now you're really starting to see real push reports-wise that maybe Houston, if Bryce Young, and that right now is a betting favorite to go number 1, does go number 1, that the Texans will pass on a quarterback at number 2. Are you buying that if Bryce Young goes to the Panthers, the Texans will not take Stroud or Richardson or Levis there at pick number 2?
Yes, and I will go ahead and go a little further. Bryce Young will be a Panther. Multiple league sources have told me that to take that to the bank, that Bryce is a Panther. It just needs to become official. So 9 days from now, Bryce Young joins the Carolina Panthers. So does CJ Stroud become a Texan? No, not necessarily. And I could see them passing on him. Several sources have expected that to happen, and that they will do a trade back scenario. And under that scenario, who are they trading with? Is that going to be the Raiders? It's going to be the Seahawks. Could it be the Colts even though that's so rare to help each other in the division? So what might happen? And there's scenarios where, what if there are no trades? What if 2 defensive players go off at 2 and 3 with Arizona after the Texans? And what if the Colts could draft any quarterback other than Bryce Young? Good situation for them to be in. And they've done a lot of work on the quarterbacks. They've met with all of them. They have high opinions on Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, or they like CJ Stroud. They don't seem to be as, maybe put off by some of the quarterbacks. Whereas the Texans, they've liked Hendon Hooker. They've been Bryce Young fans. Bryce Young wanted to play for the Texans because of the game that I'm sure you guys were there as well. The Colts losing that game when Rodney Thomas mistimed his leap. Jordan Akins catches the touchdown on 4th and 20. Desperation heat from Davis Mills. And then the 2-point to put it away. And they win the game, lose the number 1 overall pick. Then were unable to trade with the Bears. They talked about trades with the Bears. Didn't happen. Didn't get worked out. It was going to take 2 and 12. That would have gotten it done at that time before the Panthers entered the picture. The Texans entertained a potential, hey, what if we would give you our 2024 first-round pick to the Chicago Bears? And that was not enough. And ultimately, the deal stalled out. The talk stalled out, and they could not reach a compromise. And that's why they're where they are. And some people call it no man's land at 2, if you don't have a quarterback that you have a strong conviction about. And I tend to agree with that a little bit. But they're not one player away, and this is something I can't say this enough. This is not a great quarterback class. There's something wrong with all these quarterbacks. Not fatal flaws, but there's enough to pick apart. There's no Justin Herbert. There's no Joe Burrow. There's no Trevor Lawrence. None of these quarterbacks compare to those guys. I'll be surprised if any of them in a speedy manner are as good as those players. So where does that leave you? You're just basically, you have to have quarterbacks. It's a quarterback league, and people, that need quarterbacks have to draft quarterbacks in most cases. If you're the Texans and you want to take a longer approach, or you have some other ideas, you can do that too. But there's no one saying you have to draft a quarterback. I think that's where they're at. Draft a quarterback if you love one. Don't draft one that you are lukewarm about.
It's really interesting, because I know you've been down there in Houston for a while. You have your pulse down there. What what do you think the appetite of the fan base is if they pass on a quarterback at number 2?
They'll be mad, but I think the real informed fans are starting to pick up on what we're telling them, that, and I'm not going to really get into why, they don't like any of the player, not like, but don't like them enough to pick them at 2. I would just, I don't want to stay away from that. I don't want to do anything that might just be too much information on those guys. But what I would say for the fans, they're upset because they were led to believe for a while, earlier in the draft process, hey, can't lose, get Bryce or Stroud, all good. And then as you go through the draft process, teams do some digging, they get some information, and they kind of just decide, well, we might prefer to do something else. And they're right. One thing that Houston did right after the combine, after we left Indianapolis, they prioritized bringing in a couple of players for visits that were high profile guys. Will Anderson Jr. from Alabama, really clean prospect, no red flags at all, just, good character, good football player. And Hendon Hooker, wanted to check him out, know more about his knee injury, know more about him. And he was really good before he injured his knee. ACL tears, that's not a big deal nowadays. Deshaun Watson had one of those. Deshaun Watson had one in the NFL. You eventually make it back. You'll be good as new. So, Hooker is more of a longer play. Maybe it's kind of a redshirt year, but he's absolutely a very good football player. And by all accounts, I've heard, a good guy.
Aaron, if you don't want to talk about why the Texans don't like CJ Stroud, how about when? Was this when the draft order, was announced? Did the Texans kind of right away kind of know it was Bryce or bust, or this is as they've dug in, combine, pro day, meeting the visits, and it's kind of separated where it's really, okay, Bryce and then everyone else?
I think it's more that as you look into it, and you reach a feeling about a player, a consensus. And they wanted Bryce, and Bryce wanted them. And now it's not going to happen. And so that's a disappointment. And what's Bryce going to do? Tell the Panthers, don't draft me? No, of course not. And the Panthers aren't, as we're talking, or maybe shortly before, Scott Fitterer said, they're not looking to trade the pick. So
Right.
It's over. He's going to be a Panther.
From your perspective, because you've done a lot of the same work that we have done, here, trying to figure out what this quarterback class looks like and how it should be ranked. How would you rank these 4 quarterbacks that are most often talked about at the top of this draft?
As far as now or upside? What are you thinking now?
Now, as far as what they'll be like in year 1.
Okay, where they'd be like in year 1, I would be pretty traditional about that. I would go Bryce Young. I would go with CJ Stroud. I think he's more ready than Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. I think Richardson has more upside than all these quarterbacks combined. I really like the future. Maybe you're getting in on something like that's like Amazon or Tesla early stock with him. But yeah, I just like him better. I think that he can be coached. I think he can improve. I think he's, impressed everybody throughout the draft process. Not just the tests. He's tested really well with the S2 cognitive test, with the Wonderlic, with the interviews. He's really aced the whole draft process. That's the feedback I've been getting on Anthony Richardson.
Aaron, with now seeming like the Texans not going to take a quarterback, do you think it's more likely that they stay there and pick and maybe take a Will Anderson Jr., or is it more likely they try to trade down? And if so, have you heard any trade partners or any teams kind of calling the Texans at number 2 to kind of try to get up to maybe either get a Stroud or an Anderson, or a Richardson?
They're already getting calls, and I'd be surprised if one of them isn't the Raiders. I think that the Raiders are a team. Watch out for them. Watch out for the Seahawks. Those are teams that could be on the move up.
I think that's it for me. I just, I want to say thanks, Aaron, for joining us and for really great info. The one thing, I guess I would ask, just in kind of parting, What was the mood when Lovie Smith went for 2 and won that game? What was the mood in Houston? Was there celebration, or was there, hey, we just lost the number 1 overall pick?
It was the latter. People were
Hmm.
upset, but it's hard to legislate losing. The only way they can make them lose would be to make those players inactive, like Brandon Cooks, Jordan Akins, Davis Mills, and that's a really bad look to tank a game. Remember all the, off the Eagles a few years ago, and they didn't want to be in that spot. They've had a lot of bad PR down here, George, as you know. Sometimes you should be better off punting than doing something that's really manipulative like that, and it hits a lot of people the wrong way, and it really bothers players because they're out there fighting. And I think you should never really underrate the man in the arena, how they feel, because it's really easy for us. We don't have any skins in the game, like we're watching, or it's easy to second guess. That's what we do. That's the fun of it all. But I always have to respect these guys are on the field. They're putting their bodies on the line, probably their future, brain health, their brains on the line. A lot of things that go on with that. It's Lovie Smith's last game. He's going to be a head coach, in my opinion, ever in the NFL. I don't know if he'll might want to coach a college. Who knows? But that's my opinion, and I'm probably right. I think that he won't get another head coaching position. So he wanted to go out a winner. That's what he did, and it was a fluky play. I mean, if Rodney Thomas had jumped better, and he's capable of making that play, he's a good football player, then we're having a different conversation, and they're going to get Bryce Young. And so it was a franchise and league altering outcome of a meaningless football game. How about that? We were there.
That it was. Aaron, I just want to finish up with this really quickly here. I saw Peter Schrager put out his mock draft earlier today, and he had the Colts trading up with the Texans at pick number 2. You said the Texans are getting calls. Do you think there's any chance we see an in-division trade and the Colts and the Texans would swap places at 2 and 4?
No.
Okay.
All respect to Peter. I like Peter. I don't agree with him. I thought there was some things that in there I didn't really read it. I don't know. And this is I don't really care about anyone else's stuff. I'm more just like, I only know what I know.
Right.
I can't go off anybody else. So I always take the position of, I have to check. I can't be like, oh yeah, they said it. They're good. I don't care. Doesn't matter. You could tell me it's Red Smith or whomever. I always have to check. And I don't like to go off other people's information. I like to go off of what I know firsthand. And I have a real rule of thumb. Secondhand sources never, you can have 5 of them, but won't equal 1 firsthand. So like on the Nick Caserio thing, if you're not talking to Nick or Bill Belichick, then you're talking to someone that's not directly involved. So
right.
Probably should avoid the story, or avoid like saying, really paint yourself into a corner. So yeah, when it comes to that, would Chris Ballard and Nick Caserio do a trade? I mean, it'd have to be great terms. They'd have to get a ton back, and you're going to play against this guy twice a year. So it really makes no sense unless you think the player that they're trading up for that you think they're not very good, and maybe that you don't agree with their evaluation, and they're not going to even tell you who they're trading up for. Like, let's say if Chris made that call, he's not saying to Nick, "Hey Nick, I really want Stroud. I want this spot. What I got to do?" I mean, you're just weakening your leverage. So there's just no way. I mean, it's possible, but it's not. It's a really unlikely scenario. So that's when it kind of lost some credibility for me right there. I don't know. I mean, George, you're in Indy. What do you think?
No, I'm with you 100%. I can't say, and I don't know. I read a little bit more into that. He had DeForest Buckner going back to Houston in the deal, and I can't see Chris Ballard wanting to play DeForest Buckner twice a year. I agree 100%. I don't
maybe
see that working.
Injuring his new rookie quarterback.
Right, right.
He has a wrecking ball. Yeah, I mean, but they have Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins here. Not that they're the same quality as DeForest, but
right.
Those are starting defensive linemen last time I checked, and they can draft one. So why do they have to do that trade? So I don't know. I think, yeah, sometimes I watch everybody. I respect everyone. I respect Peter, but that's where it lost credibility for me right away. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so.
It seemed like clickbait to me. I'm with you. I mean, I think Peter does a great job, but it seemed to me
He's
like
not
just
really.
trying
He's
to get
more of
some
a
attention.
more personality than like a hardcore reporter. But occasionally, like I'll have like the odd scoop here and there, or like at the Matt Filer one day. But it's just like occasionally I'll have something, but most of the time doesn't have like that type of stuff. That's more like left for the other reporters. So it doesn't. It's not a knock on him. It's just he's a studio guy. He's a host and interviewer and author, and he's great. But he's on television mostly. Yeah, he's not like out there with a ton of like transactional scoops or trade stuff. We'll see. I just don't think. Maybe somebody tells the Texans they should do Stroud. Maybe the owner steps in. I don't know. I think if he's hearing from he doesn't like to meddle Cal McNair. If he's hearing from the football people that that's not the guy, then he'll be on board with it. Whatever they do, I mean, they're not one player away. That's the thing is that the perceived desperation. This is year one for D'Amico. Why is the organization like they had 3 wins last year? What if they win 6 this year? Okay, that's improvement.
Right. Is it the number 2 slot, Aaron, or is it the quarterbacks themselves that are giving the Texans pause? Like if they trade down, let's just say, for argument's sake, it's the Raiders. So they go from 2 to 7. Is there a chance that the Texans, okay, now they're at 7, if Richardson is still on the board or Levis is still on the board, they're even Hendon Hooker, they take them because it's the 7 slot, it's a little bit lower? Or is it for them, they've just come to the conclusion, it's Bryce Young, head and shoulders, we love him, and we're not in love with any of the other quarterbacks. So if they trade down, wherever else they're picking in round 1 or 2, they're really not going to take a quarterback.
Well, no, they're quarterbacks. They just wouldn't rate them at that spot more so. But there's quarterbacks that they like and could conceivably draft. It's a lot. It's kind of a combination of 2, the preference for Bryce. It's all those factors.
All right, we do appreciate Aaron Wilson for joining us here and gave us some really detailed and good information, George. Again, especially emanating from Houston. He's got his foot or his ear to the ground there. So there's so much to react to. Let's start with this. He basically told you right then and there. It's Bryce Young number 1, and the Texans are not taking a quarterback at number 2. Whether they take Will Anderson, whether they trade down, they are open for business, and it's not going to be CJ Stroud. How does that change at all your thinking of the Colts pursuing a guy like CJ Stroud if Houston is who we thought was going to take a quarterback, so anti now CJ Stroud?
Not necessarily, because again, he didn't want to get into the reasons why Houston's not interested. And as we talked about, before he came on, it's something that's been out there for a while that they might not want him. Those might not all be completely football related reasons. And also I don't think, sort of like in the way that Aaron was saying, you go with your information and you don't go with other people's, you don't report off what other people are saying. You report off what you know or what you're hearing. I think teams have to be the same way. You don't go off other people's boards and you don't go off other people's evaluations. So, if you believe in CJ Stroud, then it doesn't matter what Houston did or didn't do. And the same goes for Richardson or Levis. And I think Ballard's been that way his entire career here. I don't think you say anything you want to about him. He's been his own man. He stayed true to his own board. I don't know how many other teams were going to take Shaq Leonard where the Colts did, for instance. He didn't care. He believed in the guy. He had a vision. He had a plan for him. Worked pretty well. A pretty good idea on his part. There was some, debate about trading up for Jonathan Taylor when he did, just because running backs in the league and, the worth of the position and all those things. And they got pretty good run with him. So, he's got a pretty good track record of doing what he believes in. It's gone both ways. There's guys that he's believed in that it didn't work out nearly as well with. But I think that's, one of the other big things that Aaron said in there is that the Colts are higher on a lot of these quarterbacks than some of the other teams are. That's something I've heard for a while. It's usually around Levis, but I think it's true of probably all 3 of the guys below Bryce Young in this draft order. And if that's the case, and that's your evaluation, and by all reports it is, then no, I don't think anything that happens above you changes your opinion on that.
It's like the same thing we just talked about last week on the Blue Horseshoe Pod. In case you missed it, make sure you check it out. Either Blue Horseshoe Pod, wherever you do get your podcasts, or we're on YouTube. The video of every single podcast is on there. Blue Horseshoe Pod on the tube. Make sure you subscribe to that. We talked about, well, should the Colts panic and trade up to number 3 if the Titans are the team that want to trade up with the Cardinals? And we both said no. Like, trust your board. If you like both Richardson and Levis, and the Titans are trading up to number 3 to get one of those guys, well, then trust that your evaluation, let's say if they get Richardson, of Levis is good enough to where you're not worried about then who the Titans are taking. You're worried about what you are doing. So I would agree with you there. I don't think the Texans' evaluation of CJ Stroud or any of the other quarterbacks should impact the Colts whatsoever. But let's talk about this. And what should the Texans do? If they're not going to take a quarterback at pick number 2, do you think it makes more sense to trade out? Or do you think it makes more sense to take the best available player, in most likelihood, let's say Will Anderson Jr.?
Yeah, I think it depends on, again, their evaluation and the offers that they're getting. I mean, if you sit there and you feel like Will Anderson is the best player in this draft, and I'm not saying they do, but they might. There's certainly people out there who put him in that number 1 overall slot and have for a while. If that's your belief, then you take him. And like Aaron said, you're not one player away. So you take him and you start building around him for a while, and you worry about the rest as it comes. But I think the other part of that is not, and I think they are comfortable doing that. I mean, I think just from what Aaron said and from what you've heard around the league, I think they are comfortable with the idea that Will Anderson's, I think most teams honestly would be comfortable taking Will Anderson number 2. The big question is what are you being offered? You know, whether it's the Raiders, whether it's the Seahawks, is somebody as far out as the Commanders want to really make a splash, you know? If those teams come to you with, you know, an offer you can't refuse, I think that's the better way, again, because you're not one guy away. It gets to be similar to where the Bears were. They don't have the quarterback right now, but the Bears are sitting there going, we're not taking a quarterback. Let's trade out to somebody who will, you know, erase the quarterback situation on the roster for the Texans. And it's the same situation now for them. It's not just one guy. Taking Will Anderson isn't probably going to move them forward. Trade out, get even more picks. You've got a ton of them. You can just keep building this team. And then when you finally do bring a quarterback in, there's going to be a better situation around him.
I think the Texans at this point should just stay at number 2 and pick Will Anderson Jr. I'm not just saying that because that would benefit the Colts, and that would be great to, again, have a team not jump them and push those quarterbacks down. You could stay at 4 and still get the guy you like. But because if you're the Texans, and Aaron just kind of brought it up before, if you're looking to trade down, I think when you have picks 2 and 12, I think you have to have a certain line that you have to draw in the sand in terms of, we're going to trade down only this far. I think after a while, you lose value. And at the end of the day, Aaron repeated it many times, the Texans are not one player away. They need talent basically everywhere. Maybe outside of left tackle and corner, they need help at every single position possible. So if you're the Texans, is it really worth trading down to the Commanders at like 16, even the Titans at 11, which in division, if you're not going to do it with the Colts at 4, you're not going to do it with the Titans then. So cross off the list. Like, I don't think it's worth it at that point to have picks 12 and 16, let's say in the draft, when you need talent everywhere compared to just staying at 2. You have another first round pick there at number 12. Stay there. Take the best available player. The only team that I think they would trade down with, and this is a discussion that I think is not great for the Colts, is if the Raiders do come calling. If the Raiders do want to go up from 7 to 2 and get CJ Stroud. The question I have about that, I'm not questioning Aaron's info at all. What I'm more questioning is just the Raiders' philosophy and strategy. They signed Jimmy Garoppolo. And I would assume they signed Jimmy Garoppolo with the intention or the assumption that it's going to be Stroud and Young in some order 1 and 2. So I think that they signed Jimmy G with the intention of trying to get an Anthony Richardson or Will Levis, have him sit for a year or 2, and kind of basically have San Francisco 2.0 for Jimmy G, where he is, again, grooming another young quarterback. I guess I just don't see a situation where they would sign Jimmy G, then trade up assets to go to number 2 to get CJ Stroud, who would play right away. Like, he would play right away week number 1. There's no reason to sit him. He doesn't need the development and the time to learn like the other 2 quarterbacks would, especially Richardson. I think for me, if the Raiders are going to trade up, I would assume it would be to get Richardson. And if you're going to then try to get Richardson, I don't think you have to move up to number 2 to get him. If you want to just get up there and get your guy and not allow, the draft gymnastics to occur, okay. But at least for me right now, looking at the outside looking in, looking from the outside in, I just have a tough time envisioning the Raiders pulling the trigger on a trade, which you would have to think includes a first-round pick next year, to get a guy in CJ Stroud and basically just throw Jimmy G to the curb. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. The one thing that gives me pause with them is the way they handle Josh Jacobs. I mean, you're talking about a team that turned down his 5th-year option and then turned around and franchised him, which is not long-term planning, obviously. And it makes me wonder, like they're the one team that might go back on something like this. But the Richardson thing I think is interesting because a couple things. One, we've been told Seattle loves him. Now, is that true? I don't know. You know, he seems like a great fit in Seattle, though. I mean, with Geno being there, but being maybe 2 or 3 more years as the starter, and then you would have Anthony Richardson time to grow. We've obviously seen Seattle do really good things in developing guys. I mean, just look at what they did with Russell Wilson while he was there. You know, bring in Anthony Richardson. They're not afraid to be kind of outside the box and to do things other teams don't do in terms of, you know, the way they want to run their offense. The things they were doing with Russell Wilson at the time that they started him, other teams weren't doing. A lot of those things are commonplace now in the NFL, but they weren't when it started. Sort of like Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes right now. You know, you see interval offenses going more and more towards the college game. I think a lot of that started with Pete Carroll in the Seahawks. So I think it's a perfect fit there. If you're the Raiders and you want Richardson and Seattle's at 5, do you need to go to 2 to get him? You know, I mean, you could go to 3 with Arizona maybe and still make it happen. But I don't know. That to me is an interesting scenario. I do think the Raiders are the one, because I think if Seattle comes up, I think it will be for Richardson. I think they would be jumping the Colts, believing that the Colts were going to take him and go get him. And I think that's an important element of this. You know, I think for the longest time, the thought process was Stroud, Young are going 1 and 2 because Stroud's going to Carolina and Young's going to Houston.
Right.
And that makes you think everybody's got those guys at the top 2 on the board. But we've been told throughout the process that wasn't the case, that there were people that had Anthony Richardson as the number 1 or 2 quarterback on their board. And I think that that's still true. And so I guess that's the outlier to me too is, and you kind of threw it out there, who are you coming up for? It's not guaranteed that whoever's going to 2 with the Texans is going up for CJ Stroud. They might be coming up for Anthony Richardson.
Right, and those 2 teams, like you said, with the Raiders and the Seahawks too, the Seahawks are in the same boat as basically the Raiders. We just give Geno Smith an extension. I don't think you're going to be trading up to get CJ Stroud, a guy who's ready to play right away. So you're right. I think if both do trade up, I think it would be for Richardson over Stroud, which again now pushes Stroud down to 3. If you're Chris Ballard on the Colts, I think pull the trigger. Again, I do think at that point, if Stroud's sitting there at 3, I think another team would try to jump the Colts to go get him. And then you're sitting there with Will Levis. But if you feel strongly that, okay, CJ Stroud, second best quarterback in this draft class, maybe even the first, who knows how Chris Ballard does feel and Shade Steichen does feel. But if you are the Colts right now, and like I said, it does either, you know, it does go in 1 and 2, Young and Richardson, absolutely go to number 3, get CJ Stroud. And that changes, I think, the entire trajectory, George, by the way, going forward. And that's also maybe something we should talk about here. We've been talking about Levis and Richardson almost exclusively the last month, ever since the Panthers kind of traded, because then we assume, like you said, okay, it's going to be Stroud and Young 1 and 2 in some sort of order. And so we talked about 2023 being a developmental year where I think we both, when we did the over-under Gardner Minshew starts, I believe, I could be wrong here, I don't want to speak for you, we both took the over as like, I think 10.5 on Gardner Minshew starts, basically saying he's going to start the majority of the season, we think, because both Levis and Richardson would be on the bench for a while before they do play. If you're talking about now, you get CJ Stroud on your team, you're able to get him either at pick 4 or even pick number 3. I think that changes expectations. I think that changes now your direction going forward, because even though 2023, I don't think will change expectation-wise, because the Colts are still not going to be very good and still need pieces around Stroud to succeed. All of a sudden, I think you're looking at a quicker rebuild, a quicker, okay, let's get, to the playoffs faster here. I think you're looking at 2024 now as a season where that's realistic. Okay, let's start attacking the playoffs and see if we can actually make some noise here. I think now that the developmental training wheels, if you will, are off, you have your week 1 starter in CJ Stroud. You could see right away how Steichen and Stroud work together going forward, what this offense is going to look like. I think now that changes expectations. It changes the course of the direction for the Colts drastically. If we're talking about CJ Stroud being their pick instead of Richardson or Levis.
I do believe, and I felt this way for a while, that he's a really good fit, maybe the best fit in the draft for what the Colts say they want to do. When you've heard them talk about what they want out of a quarterback, what's the number one thing they say? Accuracy, ball placement. That's his game. That's what he does. And then it's a lot of the rest of it is decision making and reads and things, and those are harder to judge. We can't really do that from tape. I don't think you can get a little bit of it, but you don't know what the play call was. You don't know what he was asked to do. You almost need to have the information the teams have going out there and interviewing the people around him, the coaches that he's played for, both here and in high school, and those things to kind of dig into that. But the thing I hear consistently from the people who do have that info is that Stroud's really good at that part of the game too. He's a quick processor, and I think the one thing that we've probably heard more than any other out of Shane Steichen is he wants somebody who's obsessed with the game.
Yes.
He wants somebody who's going to study film from, 6 a.m. in the morning until midnight and get back up and do it again. And CJ seems to be that guy. All reports out of Columbus are that he was, working his butt off. He's in the film room all the time. He's out there trying to get better. And if you just look at his personal history, the way he came up, I think I talked about this a couple months ago on one of the pods. Is a guy that his father wasn't in the picture. I think in middle school, and he's literally, mapping things out for his mom. Take me to this camp. Take me to this camp. This is what I got to do to get where I want to be. And that to me is something that's going to appeal to Chris Ballard. That's kind of his mentality. He loves that by the bootstraps kind of guy. So I think in a lot of ways, Stroud really fits what the Colts want to do. But I also think because of that, he gives Steichen a better chance in year one to have an offense that's close to what he wants to run. It's not going to be perfect. There's no question about that. There's still a lot of other pieces they need beyond the quarterback. But I think he's going to give Steichen a good chance to show his offense, in how he wants it to look. But I think the most important thing with Stroud, if he's the pick, is I feel like you've got a better read. Jim Irsay at the owners meeting, one of the things he said is that they're going to measure this year on the direction the franchise is going. And it's that kind of vague, okay. And he was saying, you'll know it when you see it. Everybody knows that these are going the right way. I feel like Stroud, of all the quarterback options that are realistic for the Colts, because Bryce Young's a Panther already, is going to give you the best read in year one on that. The other guys might not start 17 games, might not start 8 games. And I think they delay that process a little bit. It's harder if a guy comes in mid-season at quarterback, it's harder to really get a feed. Good or bad, I think you're going to get that in year one from Stroud. By the time they finish playing in January, you should have a pretty good idea of the direction things are headed in. Not any final analysis. I'm not saying that. But I think with him, you'd have a pretty good idea if the arrow's pointing up or it's pointing down. And given that statement from Jim Irsay at the owners meeting, I think that would be good for the franchise.
Absolutely. I'm with you. And that's why I would obviously for me, CJ Stroud would be number one out of possibilities for the Colts in terms of best case scenario moving forward, is because, like you said, you get an answer. Look at the 49ers. They took Trey Lance in 2020. Trey Lance, I think Anthony Richardson are very comparable in terms of how raw they were, 1 year as starters, insane upside. But in terms of putting it all together so far, major question marks. And we're now going to Trey Lance's 3rd year. Now, I get injuries kind of ruined 2022 for him, so I understand that. But we're going to year 3 in San Francisco for a team that is ready to win a Super Bowl right now, and they have no idea what they have in Trey Lance, if he's the answer. They're signing Sam Darnold. They love Brock Purdy. There's just so many questions of you have no idea what Trey Lance is, because there's so much you have to go through to kind of get him ready to see, okay, can we break through and can he be the guy, or is he just not going to be able to put it all together? With Richardson, you don't want to be going to year 3 or year 4 still wondering, not knowing what you have. So I think that's also hurts your ability to progress your franchise forward, because who knows what the draft is going to look like in 2 or 3 years. But if the Colts are at the top of the draft, and let's say 2025, and you don't know what you have in Anthony Richardson where you can make a definitive decision, good or bad, and you pass on a quarterback just because, the upside of Richardson or Levis is still high. We're going to give him a chance. You want to see if we can figure it out. And you can't crack the code, and you cost yourself a quarterback that, goes on to be really successful. You kill your franchise. You really hurt it. At least with CJ Stroud, obviously, we're rooting for him to be successful. We want him to do well. But if he doesn't, if he stinks, even if we want to get to the extreme level, if the Colts are sitting there, if he's so bad, and the Colts are sitting there number 1 next year, you can move off him. You will see Stroud presumably for 16, 17 games. You move on from him, you take Caleb Williams, and you go. I don't think they'd be doing that if you have 3 or 4 games for Anthony Richardson and you're sitting there at the top pick and they say, we'll move off from Richardson. We'll take Caleb Williams. I would do it. I think they should do it. I don't think the Colts actually, if they're in that situation, would do it. I think it's a lot easier if you see a full season sample size from CJ Stroud and say, you know what, he's really not the guy. This Caleb Williams guy's canvas, we're going to pull the trigger. So like you said, you get an answer 2 years, 3 years, good or bad, and that, whether it's good or bad, if he is the guy, okay, you progress him going forward. If he's not the guy, well, that allows you to move off of him and get to a decision quicker so you're not indecisive, and you can make a decision, whether it's a trade or a draft pick, that really does help get your franchise back on track sooner rather than later. So your Stroud, being as developed as is ready, helps the Colts, either way, good or bad, make a decision going forward. And I'm with you. That's why it just cuts down on the decision-making time, which I think is also important for the Colts going forward as well, which is why I would have him over Richardson or Levis. Is he quarterback 1 for you, George? Like if let's just say the Texans are sitting there at 2, they pick Will Anderson Jr. So now the Cardinals are on the clock at 3. Stroud is on the board, Richardson's on the board, Levis is on the board. Teams are calling the Cardinals, and it's for Stroud. Would you trade up to number 3 and get Stroud? Or would you sit there at 4 knowing I could get Richardson and or Levis there and give up nothing? What would you like? What's kind of your order in terms of how you would layer that if that's how it does break out, let's just say?
Yeah, if it breaks down that way, I would trade up to 3. Because I just think when you talk about the things that they say that they want a quarterback, they're more present in CJ Stroud than they are in the other 2 guys. I think you see that obsession in Will Levis. I think that's one of the reasons that they like him more than some of these other teams. I think you see that commitment from him. I think you see it in Anthony Richardson too. I don't want to downplay that. I think both of those guys have that desire to be the best quarterback that they can be, and to, go in there and put the work in and do that element. But in Richardson's case, the accuracy is just not there yet. You're going to have to work on that. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I think it's something the Colts have said they think they can work on, but it's not there right now. And in Levis's case, the decision-making is not there on a consistent basis. You see it at times, you don't at others. And I think the confounding thing with him is, he scored really high on the cognitive test too, on the S2. There's no question that he knows it, that he can read it, that he can see things. I think that's the frustrating thing with him, is that he knows it and he's still not doing it every snap. Now, there's a lot of things to play into that. The line in Kentucky was not good last year. I think there were times where he felt like he had to be a little bit of a superhero in some plays. You're behind and you're just going to try to make a play happen and force something that you probably shouldn't, but situation kind of calls for it. But because of that, I think that you lean back towards Stroud in the prototype that they gave us, just going off what Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen have said all offseason. The guy they were describing was CJ Stroud most of that run.
And I give you credit, George, because you were first, at least that I heard, say that. I was more, and maybe this is part infatuation as well, so maybe I was kind of hearing selectively what I wanted to hear. But I remember you saying on the pod, like, they are describing CJ Stroud. I'm sitting there saying, it's Bryce Young, it's Bryce Young. But I think you're right. And you look back on it, a lot of what they were talked about did, reflect back to CJ Stroud as well. I'm with you, by the way. If the scenario just plays out like it laid out, if the Texans stay there 2 and pick, I would absolutely trade up to number 3. I would take CJ Stroud and let's go. Like, let's get the franchise going here instead of kind of almost having a red shirt year, if you will, with everyone and not really getting a lot of answers with Gardner Minshew presumably starting most of the season. So I'm with you there. If it plays out that way, absolutely trade up to number 3, move up 1 spot, get CJ Stroud, and let's go from there. Before we give our official Blue Horseshoe predictions for who the Colts will draft next Thursday, let's talk on one more thing here that we discussed with Aaron, and that was the opportunity or the possibility of the Colts and the Texans trading, right? He mentioned the Texans could stay there too and take the best available player. He also mentioned teams calling as well. If you were Chris Ballard, George, if you were Chris Ballard, would you call Nick Caserio and try to trade up to number 2? And if you were Nick Caserio, would you accept that trade? Like, do you think you both agree that you don't think it will happen? But if you were the GM in either situation, you can pick who you want to be. Would you actually consider trading with the division rival?
They did it with Watson. I mean, the Colts called on Watson. I think that's pretty much public knowledge. I'm pretty sure they said that publicly. That they called on Watson. So I assume they would make the call. I was told pretty much the Texans hung up the phone on that one pretty much right away.
On what, Watson? I'm guessing. Jeez. Can't fall from there.
The Houston was like, no, this isn't going to happen. I would assume it's going to be the same way now. The difference here is obviously you don't know what these quarterbacks are going to become, and if Houston really just doesn't feel like they're afraid to play any of these guys twice a year, I suppose they could consider it. But I just don't. The only way I would see that happen is if literally the Colts are the only suitor, and the Texans have no second number 2 grade on Will Anderson. I just don't think any of that's going to happen. I think there'll be more than one suitor, and I think the Texans would be more than happy to take Will Anderson. I don't think they're going to be forced in a position where they have to trade out. That's the only way they would do that. And even then, the Colts aren't going to give them value. That's the other part of it. It goes both ways. Like I was talking about, when Aaron asked me during the interview, the Colts are probably going to be just as leery about what they're giving back in this scenario, because they've got to play that twice a year too. And like he said, if you send DeForest Buckner up there and DeForest Buckner hurts your rookie quarterback, what if you rot here? I don't see it happening because of that. And would there be like a conversation? Probably a really short one. Yeah. But I just don't, and I don't think they're in the same boat. I don't think you worry about Tennessee going up to 2. 3, they're in play. 2, I don't think so. I think it's the Raiders or the Seahawks. I feel confident saying the other 29 teams in this case are out. Well, I guess 28. Carolina's not going to try to make that move either. So,
true.
I think it's Seahawks or the Raiders or Will Anderson. That's my belief.
I would be, if that trade, let's say calls are made on each side. From the Colts perspective, I don't think I would do it. Like, I think I'd be more likely to do it if I'm the Texans and you don't feel that great about any of the quarterbacks. Okay, fine. You trade. If you give me some draft capital, I'll trade down 2 spots and still get Will Anderson Jr. and have first-round picks. If I'm Chris Ballard, I would not do it. Like, that's to me, I guess, the point of view I look at it from and say no way. Because like you said, you don't want to give up a player, and this was just in Peter Schrager's mock draft, so we can insert players, but you give an impact player. In this case, he was named DeForest Buckner, and presumably a first-round pick in order to move up from 4 to 2. I'm more worried about the first-round pick, to be honest, because if you look at the Texans, and they don't take a quarterback, right, in this draft, and they are bad, and you look around, there's a short list of teams that we can pencil in as being a top 3 pick. Like, a lot of teams, I think, are going to try to be competitive. Now, if it works out, and obviously injuries change that, but at least right now, a lot of teams are going for it. If you're the Texans right now, and you have Davis Mills and Case Keenum as your quarterbacks in 2023, and you have the Colts first-round pick in 2024, which even if they get CJ Stroud, is a fair, I would presume, George, it's still going to be a top 10 pick. Like, I don't think the Colts are all of a sudden now going to be an 8 or 9 win team where you're looking at them saying, oh, that first-round pick is going to be later on. I would still assume and presume that pick you give up in 2024 will be a first-round pick. If I'm Chris Ballard, do not want to give a team that is bereft of talent with no quarterback, tanking in 2023, an extra top 10 pick to where even if they win 5 games next year and they're sitting there at pick 7 or even pick 3 or 4, I don't want to give them any extra ammunition to try to trade up to get Caleb Williams or to get Drake May. And all of a sudden now that extra first-round pick that's, let's just say, 10th overall, now you entice a team that's sitting there at number 1 or 2. You give them 2 first-round picks into the top 10. They take that. All of a sudden, next thing you know, the Texans are trading up and getting Caleb Williams or Drake May. And all of a sudden, now that's a guy you have to face twice a year. And you're facing him twice a year in part because you gave the ammunition. You gave the bullets to the Texans to use to execute that trade. That's why I don't think it's going to happen. Like I said, Aaron talked about it. You talked about it. I'm with you both. I don't think a trade with the Colts Texans is realistic at all. But if it comes to like which side would say no first, I would say the Colts side would say no first. I think be more apprehensive about helping the Texans out next year and getting that canvas quarterback prospect than it would be the Texans saying, I'm good on giving the Colts a quarterback.
That'd be nightmare scenarios if Arizona got the number 1 pick in next year in the deal that you're talking about, and then you've given Houston the ammunition to go right up there to number 1. Yeah, I just don't see it happening. I mean, rarely do trades happen within the division anyway. And when they do, it's usually not this kind of impact. I mean, you'd be talking about one team handing a franchise quarterback to the other, or potential franchise quarterback to the other,
right,
and the other team handing over significant draft capital to the other. You just don't do that in the division. It just doesn't happen. There's a good reason it doesn't happen. And I think the Texans are, I think the most important thing Aaron said, besides Bryce Young's the number 1 pick, is the Texans are not desperate. You know, I think that is really the view out there, is that they are, you know, they've got to do this and they've got to get a quarterback right now. And they're not desperate. They're starting over. And I think they are approaching it that way. They've got a new head coach who they have a lot of faith in, and they're going to build this thing the right way. I don't think they're going to rush anything. So trading with the Colts will be a desperate move, and they're not going to do it.
And it's also important to remember, even though Nick Caserio has been there now 3 years, this is basically also year 1 for him. Like, I think the Texans knew when they hired him and trying to get out of that entire mess with Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby and all this turmoil in the organization. When they hired Nick Caserio, basically, okay, they hired David Culley, 1 and done. There's no expectations. You hire Lovie Smith. Okay, 1 and done. No expectations. This is, like you said, D'Amico Ryans is the first hire the Texans have made where they're truly, okay, now we're starting to figure out our direction going forward. This almost feels like year 1 for Nick Caserio as well. And I don't think he's going to put himself on the hot seat or you know, risk his job anymore by making what would be an unnecessary trade with the Colts. And again, putting the target directly on his back, where right now, even though he's been there for 3 years, the Texans have been one of the worst teams in the NFL in that time period. It's not like he's truly on the hot seat. So that was kind of almost like you forgive and you forget. It doesn't really count. And now this is, okay, now the direction is set. Now we're kind of going forward here. So he's not on the hot seat. He doesn't have to make any big splashy move in order to kind of save his job. It's almost like he's, again, in year number 1, basically for all intents and purposes, which again, I think also makes that less likely of a trade to happen. And I think it also makes it more likely that they don't take a quarterback at number 2. And he's comfortable in, okay, I don't need to take a quarterback. I don't need to save my job by just putting my hopes on this rookie here to save us and go forward here. He can be patient, which goes back to number 2, either taking the best available player that's a non-quarterback or trading down. And fingers crossed for the Colts, it is absolutely staying there, number 2, and picking. Okay, George, we still have some time before the draft, but I figure now is kind of a good time to get out ahead of it. Give our official predictions of who we think the Colts will take. Not should. We're not playing GM here. This is who we think the Colts will take and where they will take them. Do you want to go first or you want me to go first?
I'll go first. I mean, I've got such a great track record I'm picking on here. I mean, I should go grab my daughter out of school right now, get her here. I'll just crib off her though, because hey, she obviously has the crystal ball in this family. Though she was wavering. I need to throw that out there because I know it's important to the audience.
Wavering on the Anthony. So in case you missed it, George's daughter correctly predicted UConn to win the national title. So she is way more clairvoyant than any of us, and she already has more predictions right than we do combined this past season. And she made a prediction a few weeks ago that she thinks the Colts will take Anthony Richardson.
Yep.
She's wavering.
She's wavering a little bit. So wow. I don't know. I thought I needed to throw that information out there.
Is there another quarterback that she's considering, or maybe she thinks that they won't even take a quarterback?
I don't know. I got to ask. I got to get some scoop here for the next pod. I just know that she was not completely sold. She was wavering a bit here.
Interesting.
So maybe the winds are changing. I'll check with her before we get back before the draft here. But I'm gonna crib off of her. I'm gonna go with Anthony Richardson because I still feel like somewhere at 2 or 3, someone's coming up for Stroud. I mean, that I just feel like that's gonna happen. Maybe it's the Colts at 3, but that's not really Ballard's MO. And right now, the assignment here is to predict what we think will happen. So I think it's going to be Anthony Richardson, and I think it's going to be right there at 4. So that's my predict right now. They stay at 4. and they draft Anthony Richardson, and we hear the word ceiling more times than we have it at any point in our life.
Congrats to every single Colts fan that wants Will Levis or CJ Stroud at pick number 3, because that is what's going to happen. Because I'm with you, George. I think my official prediction is going to be Anthony Richardson at pick number 4. Like you said, when you're talking about so it's locked up. CJ Stroud, pick number 3. Let's go get the 7 jerseys right now, and let's start going with it. But it's like you hear over and over and over again. Number one, I don't think Chris Ballard is someone who is playing poker. I think he truly is telling you what he believes. And when he tells you over and over and over again that these quarterbacks are bunched up, that one has not separated themselves from the other, whether that was when the Panthers are trying to trade up and did trade up to number 1 just past the combine, whether it's even now recently as you're doing more research and digging in, if you truly feel, and I think the Colts do at this point, that all 4 quarterbacks are tight, and you're Chris Ballard, I do think the Texans, by the way, will stick in number 2 and will take Will Anderson Jr. So I think now the attention goes to number 3. I think if you're Chris Ballard, and when Chris Ballard is sitting there in the draft room with Richardson, Levis, Stroud on the board, and you're guaranteed to be able to pick from 2 of them at number 4, I think he's going to hold on to his draft capital. I think he's going to say, you know what? I don't see that big of a difference from Stroud to Richardson to Levis. We're going to stay at 4. We're going to keep all of our picks, and we're going to, then decide between one of these 2 guys and go forward here and get, have more options than we maybe thought we would have at this point, and still have all our picks together. So I don't think he would trade up to number 3 to get CJ Stroud. I don't think they'd be that aggressive. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think he will. I think he'll sit there at number 4, see the draft play out, see someone trade up to number 3 to get CJ Stroud, and then take, I would presume, Anthony Richardson at number 4. Like I said, the tools, the raw ability, the ceiling, we'll hear all about that. And then you hope Shane Steichen does what he was hired for, molds that massive slab of marble right now, and makes it the David statue 2.0 in 2, 3, 4 years from now. So that is, I'm with that. The official Blue Horseshoe Pod prediction. We are in lockstep, which guarantees we will not be right. But we both are saying at pick number 4, the Colts do not trade up. They take the same quarterback, Anthony Richardson from Florida.
I mean, I will say this. The one prediction we both agreed on and got right involved Florida, because we picked the Jaguars to win week 2.
That's true.
So maybe it's true. Florida is where our hot spot is. So many weird things happen down there, and it's the only place we can get predictions right. So maybe
you're right about that. Lucky Florida is how we are right here in our picks. That's for sure. All right. So we do appreciate you listening to us right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod. If you have any questions, it's draft season, it's craziness, let us ask us. We'll answer them. BlueHorseshoePod@gmail.com. BlueHorseshoePod@gmail.com is where you can fire off any emails to us, any questions you got about even just the podcast in general, any questions you got about the Colts draft, where they go from here. Let us know. We'll answer them on the pod for sure. We got another podcast coming your way on Friday. Chris Ballard is scheduled to do his pre-draft media. George, here's a hot take for you. I don't think Chris Ballard's going to reveal much, is my guess. I don't think he's going to come out there and say, we love CJ Stroud, or we love Anthony Richardson, or we're not going to trade up. I would say he's going to be as vanilla as possible. Less than a week before the draft. So we'll be back on Friday, kind of react to it.
You don't think he's going to say the Ohio State kid looks pretty good?
Jim Irsay might say that. That is Jim. We got to get Jim in the room. That's for sure. He's you know what the thing is, George. He could already tell he can't contain himself. Jim Irsay. He's tweeting about all these predictions. Oh, we could stay up. We could say 4. We could move up. We could move back. We could take a quarterback. We could not take a quarterback. He is bursting at the seams to say anything right now. If Chris Ballard is smart, he's leaving Jim Irsay at home for that press conference. He is not allowing Jim anywhere near a microphone.
He's usually not there for that one. He's excited though. That's the one thing I take from all that Twitter activity. We joke a lot and with good reason, but you can tell he's confident. He's excited about whatever's going to happen this year at number 4. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It's safe to say there is some conviction at least. And so that's a good sign. If you're that excited already with still so much uncertain around you, at least you feel good about, okay, 3 of the other quarterbacks, we feel all great about all 3 of them. And we have a chance to, make a winner at all 3. So Jim's excited. It's part of the reason why we talked about it a few weeks ago on the pod, George, that I think it's a guarantee at pick 3 or pick 4, they're taking a quarterback. I think Will Anderson and those hopes are best available player, and those hopes are dashed at this point. But yes, Jim Irsay is fired up. We'll see how much Chris Ballard does want to reveal on Friday as we get set for the draft. So we have still a ton of draft coverage coming your way. Make sure you're downloading to the Blue Horseshoe Pod, bright blue logo, and make sure you're subscribing to YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod on YouTube, so you stay up to date on everything between now and April 27th. And obviously, after that as well, because there's still so many storylines to talk about after the draft is over, who they take. We're not going anywhere. So make sure, again, you don't just stay with us through the draft or stay until the draft, but through the draft as always. So we've got a lot of content coming your way. So we appreciate you listening as always. We'll talk to you on Friday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.